Hi, this is Jade with trans-coding.com. On today's episode, we're going to talk briefly about formatting and code layout, specifically the way that we lay out a web page in order to make it more readable for us as the coder and for the people that are going to come along after us and review the code and work on it and rebuild the page after us. Next up, I'll work on styling out our front page similar to the way that we did our resume. That way both pages are cohesive and the entire page looks like it was built by the same person, because surprise, it was. But it makes everything cohesive and it makes it look like the entire page is built out with the idea of a user having the same experience throughout. And so we want to make sure that the same style is used throughout. And so that's how we're going to use CSS to maintain the same theme throughout the page. And so we'll talk a little bit about how that is maintained through the page. And along with that, we want to build out a navigation bar. And so we're going to use Bootstrap's built-in navigation bar for that, along with the standard hamburger menu that you may be used to on your mobile device. We'll discuss how to build that. And along with that, I have the link that you'll need for Bootstrap here, and you'll see that in the show notes below as well. So looking at the specific code for our resume page in our resume.php, if we scroll down a little bit and we take a look at the experience section and the first EXP section that we built out, you can see that I've laid things out with tab divisions between everything, and hopefully you can see the lines that divide everything out up and down across the page here. And those lines are automatically placed by Sublime text. And the setup for that is done within the View panel and indentation, and the option here is for a tab width that can be set to any number of spaces. You can also choose to indent using spaces. This is up to programmer preference. And you can also highlight any portion of your text, and you can convert from indenting using spaces or indenting using tabs. So those options are available. Additionally, if you want to have Sublime text indent your page for you, there's an option to do that, and we'll go over that in just a moment. What I want to cover here, though, is that generally speaking, when you have one division that's nested inside of another, you generally separate that with a tab set so that you can see the division sets. So in Sublime Text, this division here, it doesn't know where the matching bracket set is. But in theory, if it cannot find it, I can use, because I've tabbed things out appropriately, and line up based off of this tab set down to the bottom of the page, and the closing division here should match up directly. And so if we use Sublime Text and wait for the hover box to come up, it says matching bracket could not be found. At the bottom here we have a link that says match brackets without threshold. When we do that, you see a little tag icon has come up to the left of this line, and then scrolling back up, right next to the div that opens that line, it should have a tag next to it. And you'll see it does, and that matches up to the line that we had for the tabs down below. And so, by keeping our tabs appropriately set up, we know where the opening and closing of every division is at. For lines where we have a div that opens up and closes on the same line, the things that occur in between it, for instance, this word experience is the only thing that occurs in this division, and so we have no need to separate that into a set of different lines. We could, if we wanted to, place the div on its own line and place experience underneath with a tab set in there for it, and you'll note that on the page itself that word experience still appears in the exact same spot. So moving the code itself doesn't change where it appears on the page. It only makes it easier for us to read the code. Now, as an example of what would be considered in the industry to be poorly written code, we can take and we can remove all of the tabs, and you'll be able to see So if we remove the tabbing from a section, it's pretty easy to see that everything gets jumbled up pretty quickly. It's hard to tell where a div begins and ends. It is nice to have Sublime tell us to some extent where these things occur at. So you can see that the beginning of this div ends here at this spot. But generally speaking, it's hard to find where things begin and end. This div here ends here, but that doesn't seem to make much sense in the scheme of this large jumble of opening and closing tags that have been stacked one on top of another. It's very difficult to read it, and so we want to format things in such a way that we can easily tell where the divisions are. So if we keep everything lined up from top to bottom, so that the opening of a division or an element, an anchor, whatever element you happen to have at the time, lined up with its closing tag, then we always know that the things are lined up, and it makes it much easier to find the openings, the closings, and to make sure that things are lined up and that they make sense with each other. This also goes along with comments on sections. So labeling the first of a section, the second of a section, and in some places you might label the beginning of a section, and down below you might label the end of a section. So we had the beginning of the accordion, and down here I've labeled the end of the accordion. Simply because it's such a long section, I wanted to make sure that I knew that this division here specifically is the end of that accordion section. So earlier I mentioned that Sublime can do some of the formatting for us. So if I take all of the tabs out of this section and keep it highlighted, I can hit Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P in a Mac and type in reindent, and you can see there's an option here for indentation, reindent lines, and if I hit Enter, you can see that it's actually reindented it to the exact same spot that it was before. And that's because Sublime has gone in, looked at exactly the way that I had my indentation before, and it's reindented the lines to that spot. And you can see that it's also indented using tabs instead of spaces, because I was using tabs before. Tabs are denoted with dashed lines that you can see here. If we had used spaces instead, you can see that when I highlight spaces, it uses a dot with a little bit of spacing in between each of those. So dots are used with spaces, and tabs are shown with dashes. So that's a little bit of formatting. We will cover formatting again when we go into PHP and some of JavaScript, as the formatting for those can be a little bit different. Generally speaking though, when you do format for different programming languages, it doesn't matter how you format. Make it look good for you, make it easy to read so that you can come back and change it later, and that's all that really matters. Don't worry about the formatting. Make it easy to read and make it easy for you to understand, and we'll move on from there. Alright, now that we've discussed formatting and code layout a little bit, we're going to go back to our front page and we're going to apply the same style of our resume to that front page. So go ahead and navigate back to your front page. If you recall, the front page is going to be found by not listing a final address. So we're just going to go to localhost:8080/public-html/ and then no address after that. And it should navigate to your index.php or index.html page as appropriate. And then in Sublime Text or your text editor of choice, go ahead and navigate to that page as well. Earlier we had already set up the HTML for the head, so we have the doc type, the header with all of the metadata, the fonts, and the opening body tag for that as well. And so the body is where we're going to do all of our manipulations today. I'm also going to open up the resume page and use that for my reference. It may be helpful at this point to have both of them open at the same time, and one of the ways that we can do that in Sublime is to open up two different windows. That can be done by going into the view and choosing two columns or two rows. And once you've done that, you can drag one of those windows to the bottom or to the side, depending on whether you've got two rows or two columns. Another way that you can set up those columns is by holding Alt-Shift on Windows. On Mac, I believe it is the Command-Shift key and the number of columns that you would like to display. So I would type in Alt-Shift-2 to have two columns display, and then I could just drag over one of my documents to that side. That sets them side by side and makes it easier for editing. So some of the things that I want to use from my resume are going to be the font family, at some point we may end up using some images. We're definitely going to use the same top, and that should be it for now. So now that I have those same styles here, I'm just going to go ahead and apply them where appropriate. I do want to keep this same H1 as before. That's going to make it easier for some search engines to use. And of note here at the top, I do have this script src.js/scripts.js. We don't actually have any JavaScript yet. This may cause an error in your browser. So if we right click and inspect on our window, you'll see that there is a 404 error for that information on script.js. Go ahead and remove that for the time being. When we come back and do JavaScript, we will take care of that and add that file in for our use. At this point, I'm also going to remove all of the paragraph tags, as I want to turn them into divisions that have their own separations. And if you'll recall, our separator before was section holder, so I'm going to use that to separate from here on. I want to go ahead and include the logo for the website in the top left of this as well. I'd like to include it in the nav bar, so I'm not going to worry too much about the way that it's displayed currently. So I went ahead and went back to the resume page and grabbed one of the image logos for that, and I'm going to use it that way. And I'll just go ahead and remove the class on it because we're not going to use that same class anymore. And once that's set up, we'll just do a nice refresh. Take a look at that so you can see the logos displayed at 100%. We'll take care of that in a moment. I have all of the words in the places I believe that they need to be at. They're divided with their horizontal rules that we created with the pink bar instead of the standard flat line. And I think this is a good start. So now we'll go ahead and head over to Bootstrap and deal with the nav bar. Alright, so as we begin to think about a nav bar for our own site, we don't really have that many places to go yet. So I think that our nav bar, we're going to want to put a logo for our site on the left-hand side. And then when the website is large, we're going to want to have a link to our index, and we're going to want to have a link to our resume. So you can see we've got the resume down here where it says please click here that we had built previously. Let's make sure that still works. It does. And then on the logo itself, I've gone ahead and made the link to /public_HTML/, and when we click on that logo, it appears that it returns right back to the place that we started. So we already have those two links that we need on our page. So we just need to build out the words for them. If we look at the way that nav bars are built out, we can take a look at this other website, and you can see that they have their logo in the top left. They have multiple drop-down menus. We can see they use this down caret to show that. And when we click on those, they have highlighted words that are not clickable, and then each of those have a link. And then on the right side, each of these is either a highlightable word or a button that can be clicked on. And when the window itself shrinks, the menu then goes into a hamburger, where those links are now clickable again on their own line, and then the drop-downs expand out to something that can be scrolled through. And so while this is much more complex than something we need, I do like the idea of just this top line, of having a hamburger menu that extends out to having just the two links that we'll need. So I think that might be something that we can use. So if we head over to Bootstrap's navbar, which I will link in the show notes, if we take a look at their examples, we see that they have a navbar here that, if we expand out, has a home and a link in it. It's also got a search bar, some disabled entries, a drop-down menu, a lot of the same options, and when it's shrunk down, it's got a hamburger menu, and the hamburger menu is fully extended in rows instead of in columns. So we might be able to look through the code itself and figure out how that's done. If not, we'll go to the other website and we'll use inspect to figure out how they did it. So looking at the code itself, it looks like there's a couple of things that we can get from arias over on the right hand side when we navigate. But let's just go ahead and copy and paste and see what we can learn. So I'm just going to grab the entire thing, copy, and paste it in where I want it. It looks like the navigation bar itself is going to be in its own navigation class, but I do want that at the top. In our index, we have an ID of resume top that we were using to delineate the top of the page. I may want to change that ID to something else to be a little more akin to page top instead of resume top, so that it applies to all pages instead of just the resume. I think we should probably do that now. But let's go ahead and paste in our navbar first, and then we'll make that quick change. So with that paste of the navbar in, you can see it now sits at the top of our page here. And now we can go ahead and take a look at it and see what changes we'll have to make in order to make it our own. So I think this word navbar is what we're going to replace with our logo. So let's go ahead and find where that occurs at. So here we have the nav, which is a class of navbar. The navbar expands when the window is a size of large. For our browser's context, let's go ahead and check out what that actually means. So I'm going to search for Bootstrap, large window size or large pixel size. And so you can see that that means, based off of this quick return, that large is going to be anything of 1200 pixels or larger. I specifically want to get this more geared towards tablets, and so I'm going to use a small pixel size because we've only got a couple of words to worry about. So I'm going to have ours shrink down on a small size. So that's what I'm going to use for my expand. So when we set that up on our own page, you can see that the navbar is now expanded at this size. And when we shrink it in, you'll note that it did shrink down at this point. So if we do an inspect and move the bar, So when we have Inspect open, you can see at the top right, it's showing the width of the window in pixels. So it appears that Bootstrap 4 has changed things up just a little bit, and medium is now the size for 768 in Bootstrap 4. In Bootstrap 3, medium was 768 pixels. So you'll note that at the top, when I'm inspecting, if I click this Toggle Device Toolbar button, it gives me options for the pixel sizes of the screen. So at mobile, size large, 425, you'll note that the nav bar extends across the top of the page, and it's been shrunk down. And when I click on tablet size, it's expanded out to include the entire word set. Now, you will notice that things are a little bit off in terms of the way that they appear on screen, and that's because Google Chrome doesn't do the greatest job of swapping back and forth between sizes in a responsive fashion, but it is close enough that you can get an idea of what's going on. So you can see when we moved out of our mobile view and toggled our device toolbar back to a standard view, when we scroll out right at 769 pixels, the navbar changes from the hamburger style menu to the open menu. And that's exactly what I'd like to have appear. So let's go ahead and move on from there. So the other option at the top of the nav there was a navbar light marking and a BG light marking. I went ahead and changed those to dark so that we can have a darker navbar color. You can always leave that light if you like. And you can see on this next line, this anchor tag has a class of navbar brand. That leads me to assume that this word navbar is going to be this word navbar here, and that's going to be where we want our icon to appear. So I'm going to go ahead and move our icon from where we had it before up to this spot. And in this case, I'm not worried about having the icon appear twice, so I'm going to go ahead and put it in both places. That way when our navbar is on multiple pages, it will be in the navbar as a smaller icon, and it will be on our front page as a large icon. And you can see again, it's put it in as the entire icon, so we're going to have to go ahead and make some changes to it so that it's a much smaller icon. For navbars, typically you're looking at somewhere between 30 and 100 pixels squared for your icon sizes, so I'm going to go ahead and set that up for this icon specifically, and that's going to be the style on the image itself. Alright, so I made a couple of changes to the width and the height of this image so that it stays in ratio with the original image. You can go ahead and do the same with yours. For the actual wording in the navbar itself, the original one has home, link, and then the drop down. And let's go ahead and look for that in the navbar itself. So you can see we have the navbar brand, the image, and that is for the navbar itself. I want the link of the navbar to go to the original page, and so we're going to use the same link that we've got down below. That's going to be this /public HTML. And the target I want to be top, which means that it's going to take us to the page and then locate us at the top of that page. Alright, so that's in place. And you can see now that this is the button for the hamburger element. It is the navbar toggler. It is of type button, and it causes a collapse when it is toggled or untoggled. The target is the supported content window, and that's the ID for it. And so you can see that's the next following tab. That's navbar supported content. The ARIA controls for it are the controls that are going to be read for those people that have a screen reader or who cannot read the screen themselves. And so we're going to leave those in place so that they have access to these controls as well. So the ARIA controls are going to have the same name. Navbar supported content is the ID, and we're going to leave the ARIA controls as that same name. We're going to start out as ARIA expanded is false because we are not starting out with the navbar open. And the ARIA label for this is toggle navigation because that's what the button does. It's toggling between opened and closed for navigating on our page. And so the only things that we need for our page specifically are going to be the home page and the link to our resume. So that is all that we're going to deal with in terms of our page. The phrase current here is the highlight for the page that we are on. And so you can set it up to highlight if you want, but you don't have to. Alright, that concludes the changes to the navbar here. So you can see we have the home and the resume link, and when we click resume it does go to that page. And so I'm going to go ahead and take these changes and I'm going to make that to the resume page as well so that we've got the navbar on both of those pages. And you can see that when we shrink the window down, the hamburger works as well. One other change I am going to make before moving over to the other page is I want to place this below the header. And so I'm going to go ahead and move that navbar to that location. So I'm going to have that between the blue header and the first pink line that we've got on the page itself. So I'll do that here first, and then I'll go ahead and move over to the resume page and do that change there as well. As we talked about with the formatting before, when I highlight here you can see that this is formatted out with spaces, so I am going to reformat this before incorporating it into my page so that it uses tabs, and I'm going to do that with the reindent. That's going to be Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P on your Mac, and then choose reindent lines. And now you can see we have our navbar on both pages for navigation. You'll note on the resume page that home is still lit up. So if we take a look at the navbar itself, if we look at the content on it, in this unordered list, the first list item is listed as active. We want to go ahead and remove that for the first link, and we will place that as active for the second one. So now on our resume page, the resume is now marked as the active link. Now when we go back and look at our home page, you'll note that that top display of the logo is still a little bit too large, so we'll go ahead and make a few changes to that. I also want to take a look at this spacing under the page here. So I'm going to inspect the page, And I'll go ahead and move my window a little bit so that we can get a better look at the page itself. So when I look at the body, if I hover the mouse over the nav, you can see that that little line area of white is not part of the nav bar, and it's not part of the main top, so it has to be some division in between. It looks like it's part of the H3 there. So if I highlight the H3 by clicking on it, I can now go into here and I can see that H1s, H3s, and all of the H's with numbers after them have a margin bottom set. And if I were to remove that, I believe that would remove some of the white spacing underneath. Looks like that H3 still has a margin block end of 1 EM. So I want to go ahead and make that change. We'll see if we can make that happen when we resize the image for our logo. Alright, so in order to get rid of the margin at the bottom of that H3 tag and the H1 tags, I've gone ahead and set up this little line of code set that is H1, H3, and in it has margin dash bottom, 0 pixels, and it has this exclamation point important in front of it. And what that phrasing does is it tells the CSS styling sheet and the HTML that whatever appears in front of important is going to override the original code. It's not necessarily best practice to do this, but when something is set by the compiler or by the software, sometimes it's important to override it. And so that's why we're going to use that phrase. I think that's a decent place to stop for now. We have the nav bar with our icon in it. We have our front page looking pretty decent as it stands. We have a link to our resume that we can jump to, and we can go back to our home very easily now as well. When our home page or our resume page are reduced in size, we have an easy hamburger menu that we can access. And I think that concludes all of the issues that we wanted to take care of this time. Next time we're going to take that nav bar and we're going to try and figure out a way to deploy it on all of our pages so that we don't have to copy and paste it everywhere. In addition to that, we don't want to keep using this job image, main top, H1, H3, and section holder on every page. So we want to start looking into ways that we can deploy that on every page without having to retype that or copy and paste it into every page that we've got. So I hope that you'll join me next time. If you enjoyed this page, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. My name is Jade, and this has been trans-coding.com.